Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where it's about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of The Time Traveler's Wife. A great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I am going into this knowing, I read up a little bit about the premise, but I knew nothing going into this series. I've never read the book, nor have I ever watched the movie adaptation either, so this was kind of my first experience with the story. For one, did not know Stephen Moffat was a part of this. I think he's the one who developed this, which I thought was kind of interesting. Obviously, the thing I best associate Stephen Moffat with is Doctor Who. I want to say he ran the show from series 5 to 10 maybe? Because I think he did all the Matt Smith, the 11th Doctor, stuff. I want to say maybe all the Capaldi stuff too. I want to say, because I know it got a new showrunner with Jodie Whittaker, but I don't remember if, I don't know. Regardless, I wonder, has he also done a whole bunch of... It's very befitting, and, because I talked about this, I want to say it might have been during this month's watch list. I talked about the fact is it reminded me of the Doctor and River song, because to me that's one of my favorite couples, just because of how their story is told. Their story's told backwards, and it's so that's why I almost feel like that relationship had to be like a little bit of an homage to The Time Traveler's Wife, because the book predates those seasons of Doctor Who, so I'd assume so. But I'm like, that's I like it as a concept. I was like, and so getting into this story being what it is, and I love the whole thing of like, oh, time travel isn't a superpower, it's a disability. I did a video probably a couple years ago called Superpower, downsides to superpowers, and I talked about the downsides to time travel as a superpower. This would have been the perfect one to include, but once again, I didn't know this story at that time. So, but I like that it's like, oh, it's not a superpower, it's a disability, it's an illness. We still don't know how he caught it, but we do know, looking at time frame wise, it seems like the first time it ever enacted was him at age 7, and the question is, well, why? So I know, is his mom played by Kate Siegel? That looked like that was her. I should have stayed for the credits. I'm not sure. Also, his dad is played by I'm blanking on the character's name, but most recently, well, I've seen him in stuff before, but most recently was like WandaVision. He was he's the guy in charge of S.W.O.R.D. that was kind of a dick. That guy. I was like, hey. But it seems like Henry's first time traveling was at 7. So. And once again, just getting associated with the rules of time travel. One, every time he time travels, he's naked. Which reminds me of the show Forever. It's a show that I really liked, that was sadly only got 1 season. Basically, a guy's immortal. Every time he dies, he suddenly will come back to life, but his clothes, he'll wind up naked in like one of the nearby places. It's in New York. It's like one of the oceans or whatever, a certain body of water he would constantly pop up in. So it reminds me of that, him constantly being naked. But also, once again, him and Claire's story just being out of order, very, like I said, very Doctor Who, 11 and River Song, but obviously that even applies to 12 as well. I mean, well, 10, 11, and 12, because 12 is where they met their end. 11's most of their relationship, and then 10 was when they first got introduced. So it's interesting how that worked. But focusing on this, like the whole aspect of him getting sick every time he time travels, he never goes too far in the past, because the furthest he'll ever go is within his own timeline, which is so interesting. Like they're very specific set of rules. So like he never ends up like crazy in the past. It seems like the furthest he'll probably ever go is at the very least the 80s maybe, because he's like 80. He was born like 1980, so like anywhere from 80 till anywhere in his timeline. He even says that he can go to the future, but he what was it? It's not that often. It happens from time to time, which is interesting. But even then, he goes to the future, but it's his own future. So, and I'm jumping all over the place. I should really break down the story. But it's like, I'm always fascinated when something's set up to its own time travel rules. The fact is, he met himself this episode and interacted, and it wasn't that weird. I'm like, wait, that doesn't create a time paradox. Maybe because his time travel is so very specific and he's interacting. Like, the fact is you can interact with yourself without the space-time. Like, I'm always been under the assumption of never let two objects from the same time period or whatever touch. Like, you never want to run into your younger self because you created a time paradox. Or like I said, even objects, because that's 12 Monkeys, specifically the TV show, which it's still probably currently my favorite time travel show. I'd say my favorite three will probably be Doctor Who, Legends of Tomorrow, and 12 Monkeys. 12 Monkeys is still kind of my top. But regardless. But knowing, like, that's why I was so surprised. You're interacting with yourself. You even touched yourself. I wonder, was it a little different because you weren't wearing clothes from it? Because you're not wearing clothes from a different time. If you touched your body parts from a different time, maybe that would create the paradox if it was skin on skin. But if you're touching the clothes which are from this time, then maybe that doesn't create any paradox in that regard. Maybe that's something they'll touch on. But also the fact is, it's not just every aspect of him time travels, including he's like, oh, this is my baby tooth, is going to time travel back to underneath my pillow, even my fingernail clippings. You're like, Jesus. So any little strand of hair you have will automatically time travel, but it will always pop back. But, very Doctor Who-esque in that, oh, don't worry, you don't have to worry about it. We'll come back. Oh, we came back to present day. Everything's fine, right? We've gone maybe 5 minutes. Nope, you've been going a month. It's very much like that. He can always get flung back to where he initially time traveled from, with the initial point of the time travel, but he won't always be there. Like, sometimes it's like, as he says at the beginning, it's a nap. Other times it's straight up sometimes it's a nap. In other situations, he can be going hours, days, weeks, months type of situation, which is kind of crazy. And just, once again, just like, it's there. I think that's going to be the message of the show. It's trying to find beauty in this complicated life, trying to make things work. Him and Claire, that this is a very complicated circumstance to build a relationship around. And it's also a little weird, a little complicated, knowing how he met Claire, because it's interesting. The first time Henry meets Claire, she's 20. The first time Claire meets Henry, she's 7. So it's interesting how that all works out like that. No, she's 6, I believe. Yeah, she's 6 when they first meet. Sorry. So I even love when he meets the younger version of herself. She's like, especially because the way they introduced the story, because obviously when we are introduced to Henry, it's him at 28, Claire is, well, we first see Claire at 6, then we time skip to, hey, this is her at 20 and Henry at 28, and they're meeting, and she's like, wow, I didn't realize this is how we were going to first technically meet. She's like, wow, I didn't know you were a librarian, because they've met so many times, 152 times over the years, over the past 14 years, at least at that point in time. Well, because the 152 times might be totality of all the, well, because she has met older versions of him, so in totality, in the time she's known him, he's time traveled 152 times. That's not including everything from 7 to 28 at the very least. But so he's probably only keeping track of the time frames where him and Claire meet. Those are probably the more significant ones, because it's like, right, this is the person that you're destined to meet who ends up changing your life forever for the best. But yeah, it's that complicated thing. Once again, I will always keep making the comparison, but the River Song and Doctor situation of like, right, every time I meet you, I know everything. Claire knows well, at least a good chunk about Henry, but Henry knows nothing about her when, at 28, when he's 28 and she's 20. And the fact is that there's still stuff she doesn't know, because Henry kept stuff from her, because it's like, right, I can't know too much about my own future. I think just, for one, don't want to take the chance that it might change things, but also because things need to happen a certain way, and I guess it's like their way of not disrupting the space-time continuum. But it's also like some interesting surprises, and don't want, if you have too much future knowledge, it will spoil the future. So he wants at least Claire to have some of those surprises, and wants, I guess, his future self to have some of those surprises as well. But Because it doesn't seem like anyone else in his life knows about his circumstance. And I guess it's like, it's such a weird thing. Why would you ever tell anyone? I wonder, did his parents ever find out? We don't know what his situation is with his parents at 28, whether they're already going or not. But when he was cleaning up his place, because it's like, oh, me and Claire are about to go on a date, I thought it was interesting because I was like, okay, he was cleaning up and there was like, I think there were like tampons, there was a brush with hair and stuff. I'm like, wait, I didn't take it as like, oh, he has a girlfriend. I took it as like, oh, maybe it's like not necessarily a one night stand, but maybe someone like a lady friend with benefits type of thing. I didn't take it as like a relationship. I was like, oh, because I thought the whole I was like, oh, and in retrospect, it's like, well, yeah, of course it's a girlfriend situation, because if it wasn't, why would he go through the trouble of hiding everything? So it's like, yeah, it makes sense that it's like, no, he's hiding the fact is he's in a relationship with a lady named Ingrid. Which is kind of messed up. It's like, yeah, you're cheating on your girlfriend, but it's also like, right, you're cheating on your girlfriend with your future wife, who you just found out, wait, you're my future wife. It's like, yeah. It's like, wait, what? I just met you 4 years ago, and now, and it's like, and she notices every time she's like, every time I say couple, you swallow very loudly, because it seems like he has an issue with commitment, which is interesting considering you're in a relationship, but maybe that's why he had such an issue with her saying that, because it's like, oh, cool. So, he probably never thought he'd be tied down. A relationship is one thing, but being married is a whole other commitment that he probably never thought that, oh, I'd ever like tie myself down to someone. And now it's like, oh, like I meet you and we're not married. You haven't married me yet, timeline wise, but you're just saying in the future you're going to become my wife. So you haven't even gotten to that point in our story yet, and neither have I. And it's like crazy to think we'll get there, especially because I'm currently in a relationship with someone else without telling you I'm in a relationship with someone else. And like the cut back and forth between him at 36 when he met her at 6. And she ends up bringing him clothes, but she treats him like he's her imaginary friend. She's like, right, I'm not going to apologize for throwing my shoe at you, which I'm like, it's funny. She said that as a... I love how they do that. It's so interesting. She said it at 6. At 20, she also says, like, she's not going to apologize. And her at 28 is like, oh, yeah, sorry about that. You know, it's like, it's so funny, like, the gambit of just, like, yeah, when you, like, stack the events together like that. And just, like, it's funny how her at different stages in her life, like, how she responds to that. And I think that's just further proof of just like how much they've both grown and how they changed, how they've been having each other in their lives have influenced each other. I mean, once again, it is this weird thing of like, it is a little weird because obviously he meets Claire for the first time at 20. When he's 28 and she's 20, that's the first time he meets her, but he will eventually meet her as a kid. So it's got to be that weird thing of like, oh, I met you, at a reasonable age, so it wasn't weird, but it's still also the thing of she crushed on him ever since she was a little girl, and for her it's like, oh my god, Henry, you're the ideal man, and she's like, right, he was always a gentleman, more like a teacher to her, and she's like, right, had to go through like her horny adolescence and hold off, but now it's like, oh my god, this is the youngest you've ever been, you're hot, let's bang it out. Like, it's weird, because even her at 6 being like, oh, you're married? And it's like, yeah, do you have kids? And he's like, no. Now, that's what I'm wondering, like, was that because I'm assuming they're going to get into it later on, but I'm assuming he didn't want to have kids because having kids means there's a good chance that they might have what he has. And also, what does that mean when those babies potentially are inside of Claire? I mean, maybe they have attempted to have kids and something went wrong, or maybe he's just like, no, I don't want to pass this on to anyone else. And also, what does that mean for the children? Like, say, like, she has, or at least any child inside of her uterus. What does that mean for I mean, to be fair, Henry didn't time travel until he was 7, so it probably, early days you probably wouldn't have to worry about it, but eventually the child would probably have to grow up. So if anything ever happens to Henry, she would never have any ties to him, which is also like the depressing thing. Which also, once again, River Song and the Doctor, we know how River's story ends, because our first introduction to River ends with her story ending. So once again, you start at the end and just fill in the gaps as we rewind to the beginning, because we did eventually see River, her origin story. So, or rather, should I say Melody Pond, not Melanie, Melody Pond. But yeah, tangents and all that aside, But she was like, right, was it love at first sight? He was like, God, I hope not. Which I was like, yeah, it probably would be weird. It's like, yeah, meeting your future wife, you know? Because I legitimately, I was like, it's weird, dude. You met your, I was like, yeah, I was feeling weird, but like I said, they met out of sequence. Once again, his first introduction to Claire was her as an adult at 20, so it's not that weird, but it's still the thing of, yeah, I think that's also why he felt weird when she's like, I'm not combing my horse, I'm grooming it. And he was just kind of like, I was like, yeah, you probably don't like the word groom because it probably makes you feel weird. I don't know if maybe that was my interpretation of it, because when I'm hearing the word groom under these circumstances, I'm like, man, that's weird. It's like, it kind of makes you uncomfortable. Like, there's a beautifulness to the story, but it's also the thing of, yeah, it's kind of weird because she met an older version of him. Sometimes she met the older version of himself, like he is at 36, but it seems like she's also met a much older version as well, so. But it is interesting to know that such a life has its complication. I mean, well, more complicated than you think, of having to show up somewhere naked, learning how to fight and steal, because, yeah, when you just suddenly pop into, like, some random time naked, people are most likely going to attack you or something, so you got to learn how to defend yourself. And, you know, it seems like time traveling, for one, makes him sick to his stomach. So it almost seems like he's kind of got that anime protagonist thing of, like, oh, yeah, I need to eat, like, ferociously to, like, compensate, you know, kind of like the Flash having, like, a high metabolism. I said anime, but using that for example. But One Piece with Luffy, or even, like, Goku. I don't know if Goku's circumstances work like that. I know Luffy did with his second gear, but that's anime nerd shit, so. Also, I love that development of, like, him when, like, because at the time we didn't know what it meant, but that big pile of blood, you're like, what the and then it just disappeared. It's like, oh, now we realize what that's all about. And despite everything, Henry's like, I try not to worry about it, because he's like, it might be my future, but it's not today at the very least. So I don't want to know what my future is, but I know it's not today, whatever that blood pile is. So it's going to be my inevitability. It's like that much amount of blood. He's like, yeah, I must be hurt or something if that's the case. And you're like, that's a lot of blood. That's what's like, it can't be like multiple bits of your blood over all these years. Like, that has to be from a single point in time. All of that blood has to be. So that's interesting. And the fact is he's seen that amount of blood at this point in time, I think means that that's supposed to be the significant jump off point, that now that you've seen it, and now that you've met Claire, your life is on a certain path that you need to get ready for. It's also interesting, like, there's a whole talk about, like, oh yeah, who's the person who told you all the time travel rules? He taught future 28-year-old version of himself, taught him how to time. Because I guess Henry was kind of expecting it when Claire brought it up, and she's like, oh, like, you said some man told you, and he was like, oh, right. He's like, right, it's going to be me. 7-year-old me is going to meet 28-year-old me around this time, because he probably remember. I mean, he was a kid at the time, so maybe he doesn't remember the details as much, but he does remember. He does apparently meet Henry, an older version of himself, over and over again at that time, because he, learns about time travel and such. So it's interesting how it does start off small, but obviously the gap has gotten bigger as he's gotten older, because we even noticed that one of the dates he time travels to is like 9/11. You're like, that's gotta be complicated, all kinds of complicated. But the initial time travel was him just going back 3 hours, popping back into the museum. But yeah, even he at that time at 28 being like, man, I have to be grown up, because he's very much not the grown up. He's just kind of living his life, because it's like, right, you just, considering the circumstance, you kind of just have to live life, because you never really know what to fully expect with everything, so you just kind of got to take it in stride. And he kind of lives that very laissez-faire type of life just because of the nature of what his life is. I even love when he showed up and his knuckles were messed up, and she's like, did you get in a fight? He's like, oh. And then we later on see, after he helped out his younger self, he time traveled, beat up the guy, took the flowers from her. It's like, yeah, you could call the police, give them your description. I'm naked, so that probably ends up distracting you from remembering any other details about me. Kind of doesn't matter in the long run. But also, like, this guy, oh, he brought you flowers? I'm surprised. He's kind of an asshole. So I got to go meet with somebody. So he bounces. they have their little date, and he's asking all these questions, which is the inverse of her at 6, where she's asking all the questions. So, and I guess that's why he's kind of thinking it's funny when he's at 36 meeting her. He's like, right, at 28, I was the one with all the questions, and here you are at 6 with all the questions. So now it makes sense why you had that reaction back when you were 20. It's like, oh, it's always going to be interesting too. Like, we're going to have to and I appreciate the show specifying like ages and stuff, so you get a clear picture, because I think that's a little easier to deal with than dates and stuff. By just being like, oh, you're this age. I'm assuming the book might be written that way too. So that might not be something that, the show just did. It's like the book might be divided, or at least it specifies with that same age marker, but whatever the case may be. It is the interesting thing that Henry isn't anything that she thought he was. And then it's like, yeah, he did the stupid thing. And she's like, right, don't hide stuff in the bottom drawer, because that's the first place I looked. It's like, yeah, so you have a girlfriend? He's like, yeah, Ingrid. And she's like, and you didn't feel the need to tell me that in between? He's like, yeah, kind of threw it all at me at once, saying you were my future wife. And it's like, I love the conversation with 36-year-old him when she's like, Ingrid, that future wife version of that future me, bitch. And it's like, what? It's like, yeah, she gets older, mature you. I get younger, asshole you. I love it. I love it so much. It's like, oh, calling your future self a bitch, because older Henry, it's the Henry she fell in love with. Because she's like, yeah, I've literally built my entire who I am around you. Which Henry's like, yeah, but I kind of did the same thing for you. That's kind of that's part of marriage. That's what love is all about. Becoming that person that the other person believes you to be. So saying that, hey, I'm only the way I am now because I eventually rose to become the person that you, because of this time loop we're kind of caught in, that the person I will eventually become and idolize and fell in love with, I eventually rise to that occasion. Granted, it's going to take me a couple years to get there. But it's also it's the give and take of relationship. It's like, yeah, it is us both growing. We both had this idealism of who each other is and building ourselves that way. But also eventually, growing and together, well, almost out of order because of their circumstances, but still. Gets hit with her shoe twice. I love. It's like, right, he got hit by her shoe as a kid, and also as at 20, because he popped up outside of his place after she stormed out and got hit by the shoe that flung out the window shoe when she threw it. So it's funny. She meant to throw it at you at 6. She didn't mean to throw. Well, she meant to throw it at you at 20. But 28-year-old you ducked it, and 36-year-old you caught it. Especially considering that hit version of him just got hit by the shoe too, so to get hit immediately afterwards too, that's so fascinating. And he explains everything, and it's like, yeah, the younger version of me is over there waiting for 10 minutes, but I was contemplating coming in here saying what I needed to say, and he's like, right, my life is scary. I would never admit it, but the way I act is because time traveling is a scary thing, because it's a storm. You never know what's coming. You never know what to fully expect, because the future is the scariest thing, because with a life that's unpredictable like mine, and you have a future that gives you hope, that's the most devastating thing about it. And so you're going to, any semblance of hope, you're going to be it comes with its own shadow of despair. Very, Danganronpa stuff stuck in my hair with the hope and despair angle of things. But it's a large shadow of despair will come with that hope, because you're right, because meeting her meant and signified that they have a future together, that he eventually gets to the point that, yeah, our relationship becomes something where I'm all in, but all in means you have something to lose and things could go wrong, and so. But I even love him being like, yeah, that version of me is hot. And she's like, no, he's not. He's like, no, even I'm in. He's like, yeah, I fucked him before. And I was like, I took that as is that supposed to be a masturbation joke that he was kind of saying? But the episode ends off at the most disturbing way. Once again, I'll always go back to it, 12 Monkeys. The end is the beginning, and the beginning is the end. In this case, the moment he saw something, and he walked over, and he was like, Henry, because he thought it was a future version of himself, and he looks down, and I'm like, it's your body, isn't it? It's like, it's even more disturbing than I thought. It's his feet. So his body must have been sliced to pieces for only his feet to time travel like that. It's like, dude, what happened to you? Whatever happened to you is brutal. For like only your feet to time travel like that, that means now, once again, it must be something brutal considering like all the blood in your body like time travels, which is heartbreaking to know. Once again, it's that time travel thing of knowing the end, knowing like, even with the River Song thing, like eventually knowing where her story ends. We got that at the beginning. So now it's like, here we are at the beginning of, what we're following of Henry's story, knowing like, hey, we're seeing you as a kid and knowing what your future holds is kind of heartbreaking. And especially because you're going to be jumping all around your timeline to know that eventually you'll get to that point and Henry's saying, it's not today. We know it's going to be an older Henry, but they don't specify the Henry that's the much older Henry that's gray, discussing things, because him and Claire had that whole conversation about how he's going somewhere she can't follow in more ways than one, and knowing that yes, those are his feet because they specify the birthmark, like it's a strawberry that you stepped on and squished. So, but he has to remind himself, it's not today. It might be my future, but it's not today. He doesn't know when it's going to happen in the future, but it's going to happen. Because at this point in time, he's met his 36-year-old self, so he doesn't know, like, how old he's going to be. Because Claire's met an older version, but we don't know when's the last time she meets a older version of, because maybe she met a much, much older version of, like, let's say he dies at 56, for example. Maybe she met 56-year-old him back when she was 6, because she said she met younger versions and older versions. So some versions, like, because the 36-year-old version is the one that, at least roughly around then, is the version she's used to. She's met that one kind of over those 14 years, along with an even older version. So is the version that we saw at the end there, the one recording the video, that was drinking his drink and disappeared, is that the one whose feet, or is that in his future or in his near future? So when he disappeared, maybe that's when he dies. Maybe, I don't know. It's definitely I'm very excited because one, I'm a sucker for a good love story, but also I love time travel too. I'm always into some like timey-wimey time shenanigans. So I'm always up for that. And so I'm excited to get to once again to experience this story for the first time and see this very, very complicated love story unfold, and see where everything ends up taking us. I don't know if this is going to be a multi-season show or not, or whether this is. I don't think I saw anything saying that it was going to be a one-season thing. I'd assume it's going to. I mean, just with the nature of things, you probably could extend it for a longer period of time. I guess it's just however long it takes to tell the full story of the book without, with the TV show, you can expand upon things. So maybe it's going to be enough that could just fit one season, or maybe it is enough for multiple seasons. I'm sure there's probably going to be stuff they add and probably don't include. I mean, obviously the movie's a much more condensed version, but the story, in this case, they're going to have wiggle room to kind of expand upon some stuff. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where things go from here. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good